The evening air in Lagos was warm and filled with laughter as Obina's family gathered in their mansion for the engagement dinner. Kayamika sat quietly beside him, her heart racing with excitement and a little nervousness. She had always imagined this day, meeting his extended family, sharing a meal together, and becoming part of something bigger than herself. She wore a simple but elegant gown, nothing flashy, just enough to make her feel comfortable. To her, love was never about what you wore or how much you owned, but about respect and connection. As she walked into the dining hall, she felt the weight of several eyes on her. Whispers rippled around the room, soft enough to pretend they weren't meant for her, yet sharp enough that she caught every word. Some of Obina's cousins exchanged knowing glances, while an aunt leaned closer to another and shook her head as if disappointed. Kayamika tried to steady her breath, reminding herself to smile, to remain gracious. The laughter around the table grew louder, but underneath it was a subtle tension she couldn't ignore. Then Obina's mother leaned back in her chair, her eyes scanning Kayamika from head to toe. "So this is the woman my son has chosen?" she said with a mocking smile. "She looks too ordinary for a family like ours." The words hung in the air, cutting through the room like glass. Some relatives chuckled nervously, while others pretended to sip their drink. Kayamika's cheeks burned, but she kept her head high, her hands folded tightly in her lap. It was only the beginning of the night, but already her spirit was being tested. The dinner carried on, plates clinking and glasses filling, but Kayamika could feel that she was the subject of quiet judgment. She tried to join in where she could, offering small smiles and polite answers, but the atmosphere was heavy. Every laugh that wasn't hers felt like it was directed at her. She focused on her food, on staying calm, hoping the night would pass without further embarrassment. But then Obina's cousin leaned forward with a smirk, his eyes fixed on her dress. "Kayamika," he said loudly, making sure the whole table heard. "Did you forget tonight was an engagement dinner? You look like you dressed for a church meeting in the village." The table erupted in laughter, forks clattering against plates. Kayamika froze, her face hot with shame. She wanted to disappear, to crawl out of her own skin. For a split second, she looked to Obina, hoping, praying, that he would defend her. She expected him to take her hand, to tell his cousin to stop, to remind his family that love mattered more than fashion. But instead, Obina leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Honestly," he said, his voice loud and sharp, "I've been trying to ignore it all evening, but my cousin is right. Look at you, Kayamika. This is how you show up to meet my family? You couldn't even try to look presentable." The laughter died down, replaced by a stunned silence. Kayamika's heart shattered as his words echoed in her ears. She wanted to defend herself, to explain that she dressed with care, that she believed simplicity was beauty. But her throat tightened, and no sound came out. She felt as if the whole room had turned against her, as if her love and sincerity counted for nothing. Obina's mother gave a satisfied smile, nodding at her son's harsh words. Some cousins whispered again, this time more boldly, emboldened by Obina's attack. Kayamika kept her head bowed, blinking back tears, her fingers trembling under the table. She told herself to stay calm, to keep her dignity, but the pain was almost unbearable. Then, as if humiliation wasn't enough, Obina delivered the final blow. He pushed his chair back and stood up, his voice ringing through the hall. "If you can't respect my family enough to look the part, then you don't belong here. Pick your things and leave." "Now!" Gasps filled the room. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke up. Kayamika felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her as she rose slowly from her chair. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand tall. Without a word, she reached for her small bag resting beside her, her fingers shaking as she clutched it to her chest. She turned toward the door, her vision blurry with unshed tears. Each step felt heavy, but she refused to let a single tear fall in front of them. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. The grand dining room, once so full of noise, was now painfully quiet, the sound of her footsteps echoing against the marble floor. She pushed the door open and walked out into the night, her heart breaking, but her dignity still intact. As Kayamika stepped out of the mansion that night, the cool breeze hit her face, carrying away some of the heat from her humiliation. She clutched her bag tightly, walking away with her head bowed, but inside her mind, memories began to stir. Pain always had a way of unlocking the past, and in that moment, she remembered her father, the man who had taught her strength, dignity, and grace. Her father had been more than a parent. He was a pillar in Lagos society, a respected businessman whose name carried weight in every corner of the city. People admired not only his wealth, but also his honesty and generosity. From her earliest years, Kayamika had seen him treat drivers, cleaners, and CEOs with the same kindness. He often told her, "A good name is better than gold, my daughter, and dignity will carry you further than money ever could." When he passed away, The world assumed Kayamika would step into the life of luxury he left behind. He had built a wide empire of businesses, estates, and investments, and everything was passed down to her as his only child. But Kayamika chose differently. Instead of flaunting her inheritance, she preferred a life of simplicity. She dressed modestly, lived without drawing attention, and never bragged about what she owned. To her, wealth was not something to wave in people's faces. It was something to protect quietly, something to use for good at the right time. What no one at that dinner knew, not even Obina, was that the house they had gathered in, the same house where she had been mocked, laughed at, and thrown out of, was actually hers. It was one of her father's properties, left in her name years ago. She had allowed Obina's family to live there, never feeling the need to announce her ownership. She wanted her relationship with Obina to be about love, not money. She wanted to be seen for her heart, not her inheritance. As she walked into the night, the image of her father came back vividly. She remembered sitting on his lap as a little girl while he scribbled notes on business paper. She remembered the way he would tap her on the chin gently and say, "Never forget who you are, no matter how people treat you. The world will try to shame you, but you must always remember your worth." Those words echoed in her ears now, like a reminder sent straight from heaven. Her tears finally spilled, but this time they weren't only from pain. They were also from the bitter irony of it all. The very people who looked down on her had been sitting under her roof, eating her food, and mocking the woman who owned everything they thought made them powerful. If only they knew the truth. That night, as she wiped her tears, a quiet strength began to grow inside her. She realized she didn't need to shout or defend herself. The truth would reveal itself, and when it did, their laughter would turn into silence. Kayamika stepped into the dark compound, her heart still pounding from the sting of Obina's words. The laughter and whispers from the dining room still echoed in her head like a cruel chorus. She leaned against her car, covering her face with her hands, and the tears finally poured out. They weren't soft tears. They came heavy, raw, shaking her shoulders as though years of silence and patience were spilling out all at once. She had loved Obina, trusted him, believed he would protect her, but instead, he had handed her to the wolves and joined in their mockery. Her chest ached, and for a moment, she felt like breaking down completely. But then her father's voice came back to her, steady and calm, the way he always sounded when giving advice. "Dignity first, my daughter. Never let anger drag you lower than those who shame you. Keep your head high, and life will expose the truth for you." She took a deep breath and wiped her face with the back of her hand. No, she would not go back inside to argue. She would not beg Obina to see her worth. She would not throw words into the fire of people who already despised her. That was not who she was, and it was not who her father raised her to be. They thought they had broken her, but she knew something they didn't. The ground they stood on, the roof above their heads, the wealth they boasted about, it was all hers. Her tears slowed, and in their place came a new strength, steady and controlled. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, her hands still trembling, but her mind now clear. Scrolling through her contacts, she found the number she hadn't dialed in months. Her lawyer, a man her father had trusted deeply. She pressed the call button and held the phone to her ear. He picked up quickly, his voice professional and alert. "Good evening, Miss Kayamika." She steadied her voice, though it was thick with emotion. "Good evening. I need you to prepare the documents for the house in Ikoyi, the one my father left me. The one Obina's family is living in. Make sure everything is in order. Tomorrow morning, I want the legal notices delivered directly to the property." There was a short silence on the other end, then a respectful, "Understood. I'll have everything ready first thing tomorrow." When she ended the call, she let the phone rest in her lap and closed her eyes. A soft breeze brushed against her skin, cooling her tear-streaked face. The pain was still there, raw and deep, but underneath it was a fire she hadn't felt before. She realized that she didn't need to shout or curse or try to prove herself. The truth had its own voice, and it was louder than any insult. Standing a little taller, she looked back once at the grand mansion, the very place she had been thrown out of. A sad smile touched her lips. They thought they had won tonight, but by tomorrow, everything would change. The next morning, the mansion woke up to its usual rhythm. The cooks were busy in the kitchen, the housemaids swept the halls, and Obina's relatives slowly drifted out of their rooms for breakfast. The night before had ended with laughter for them. They spoke about Kayamika as if she were a joke, convinced they had seen the last of her. Obina himself walked around proudly, feeling he had put her in her place. But their peace was short-lived. At the gate, a knock came louder than usual. The security guard opened it to find two men in suits standing with sealed envelopes. They introduced themselves as officials sent by the property management office. The guard, nervous, took the letters and quickly carried them inside. By the time the first aunt opened her envelope, confusion spread like wildfire. "What is this?" she asked aloud, her voice sharp. "Legal notice?" Soon, more hands tore open the envelopes, and the dining room filled with murmurs, gasps, and frantic flipping of papers. Obina's uncle adjusted his glasses and read slowly, his face turning pale. The owner of this property, Kayamika Nwosu. His voice cracked as he said her name. The room fell quiet for a moment before chaos broke out. That cannot be true, one cousin shouted. This must be a mistake, another added, shaking her head. Obina's mother snatched the paper from the table and scanned it quickly. The more she read, the tighter her jaw became. She tried to stay calm, but her hand trembled slightly. The stamp, the signatures, the dates, everything was official. It was undeniable. Before anyone could catch their breath, the property manager himself walked in, carrying another folder. He bowed politely but firmly, his tone serious. Good morning, everyone. I was sent to make this clear. The mansion you are staying in is not yours. It belongs fully to Miss Kayamika Nwosu, inherited from her late father. All rights and documents are in her name. The words hit like thunder. The same relatives who had mocked her clothes, laughed at her simplicity, and called her unworthy were now sitting in silence, staring at each other in disbelief. Some tried to laugh it off, hoping it was a prank. Others began whispering frantically, asking how this could be possible. Obina stood frozen, his hands clenching at his sides. He replayed the night before in his mind, the way he had humiliated her, the way he had thrown her out of the house that wasn't even his to begin with. The weight of shame pressed heavily on his shoulders. His mother broke the silence with a shaky voice. There must be some confusion. This cannot be true. But her words sounded weak, even to herself. The panic spread quickly. The arrogance that had filled the room the night before was gone. In its place were fear, shame, and a desperate attempt to make sense of what they had just learned. Kayamika's name, the one they had tried to stain, now carried a power they couldn't ignore. The dining room was tense, papers scattered across the table as Obina's family argued in confusion. Some insisted it was impossible, others whispered in fear, but Obina stood tall, his pride refusing to bend. He slammed his hand against the table, his voice loud and sharp. This is a mistake. There's no way that ordinary girl owns this house. Someone is trying to play a trick on us. His words carried more anger than confidence, but he clung to them as if they could erase the truth. Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed from the entrance. All heads turned toward the door. Kayamika walked in slowly, dressed simply as always, but there was something different about her now. Her posture was firm, her eyes calm, her presence commanding without her saying a single word. Beside her was her lawyer, carrying a leather folder under his arm. The room fell silent, the same silence that comes when a storm suddenly stops and everyone waits for what comes next. Obina's mother shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes darting between Kayamika and the lawyer. The cousins who had mocked her outfit the night before looked down at their plates, unable to meet her gaze. Kayamika stopped in front of the table, her voice soft but steady. I heard there is confusion about the ownership of this house. Her lawyer stepped forward, placing the folder on the table. He opened it carefully and pulled out neatly kept documents, stamped and signed with authority. He laid them out one by one for everyone to see. These, the lawyer explained, are the original property documents. This mansion was purchased years ago by the late Chief Nwosu and passed down to his only daughter, Miss Kayamika Nwosu. Every page bears his signature, along with government seals confirming her rightful ownership. The papers were passed around, eyes widening as each relative saw the proof for themselves. There was no room left for doubt. The truth stood firm, clearer than glass. Obina's arrogance began to crack. His face lost its color, but still he tried to hold on. This cannot be true, he muttered, his voice weaker now. She never told me. His words faded, swallowed by the heavy silence. Kayamika looked at him, her eyes steady, not with anger but with a quiet strength. She didn't need to raise her voice, didn't need to remind him of how he had humiliated her. The papers on the table did all the talking. For the first time, the family that once looked down on her sat speechless in her presence. No laughter, no mockery, no cruel remarks. Only the sound of their own shame pressing down on them. Kayamika straightened her shoulders and spoke again, her tone calm and dignified. Last night, you threw me out of my own home. Today, I return not in anger, but in truth. Now you know who I am. The silence that followed was heavy, but this time it wasn't Kayamika who felt small. It was everyone else in the room. Her dignity had become her power, and not one of them could deny it. The weight of the truth pressed down on the room, and no one dared to speak until Obina suddenly broke the silence. His pride, so sharp the night before, shattered before everyone's eye. He pushed his chair back and stood, his face pale, his voice trembling. Then, in a move that shocked even his own family, he dropped to his knees right there on the marble floor. Kayamika, please, he said, his hands stretched toward her. His voice cracked, almost desperate. Don't end this engagement. I was wrong, I didn't know. I didn't mean what I said. The same man who had mocked her in front of everyone was now begging, his eyes filled with fear of losing her. Not her love, but the power and wealth that suddenly shone around her. Gasps rippled through the room. Some cousins looked away in embarrassment, others whispered among themselves. Obina's arrogance had vanished, replaced by a humiliating display of desperation. Before Kayamika could respond, his mother quickly stood, her tone suddenly warm and sugar-coated. "My daughter," she said sweetly, the same lips that had once called her too ordinary, now trying to soften. She walked toward Kayamika, forcing a smile that looked almost painful. "You must forgive us. We didn't know who you truly were. You belong here. You are one of us." Her words hung in the air like a sour perfume, sweet on the outside but bitter underneath. The same woman who had mocked her just hours earlier was now trying to claim her as family. The change was so sudden it almost felt laughable. Kayamika looked at them both, Obina on his knees, his mother hovering with false affection, the rest of the family watching nervously, waiting to see if she would forgive them. For a long moment she said nothing. She only studied their faces, and in her silence, the memory of every insult replayed in her mind. She remembered the cousin who laughed at her dress, the aunt who shook her head, the chuckles, the whispers, and finally, Obina's cruel voice telling her to leave. Her lips curved into a cold smile, not one of joy but of recognition. She had seen their true selves when they thought she was nothing, and now they wanted to cover it with fake love because of her power. The irony was almost too heavy to ignore. "Daughter," she finally said, her voice soft but cutting. "Last night I was not your daughter. I was too ordinary, too small for your family. Now suddenly I am your daughter." Her eyes moved from Obina to his mother, sharp and steady. "I will never forget how you treated me when you thought I had nothing." Obina tried to grab her hand, but she pulled it back gently, her cold smile never fading. The room was thick with shame and fear. The family who once laughed at her now reduced to silence and pleading. For the first time, they realized Kayamika didn't need them, but they needed her, and she would never let them forget it. The air inside the mansion felt heavy, almost suffocating. Obina was still on his knees, pleading, his voice shaking with desperation. His mother hovered close by, her fake smile plastered on her face, as she repeated the word daughter like a charm that might erase the memory of all her insults. The rest of the family sat frozen, their eyes darting from Kayamika to the documents on the table, unsure of what would happen next. But Kayamika stood tall, calm, and unshaken. She didn't need to raise her voice or trade insults. Her silence alone had already unsettled them. She let the moment stretch, long enough for every single one of them to feel the weight of their actions. Then, in a voice soft but firm, she spoke words that cut deeper than any scream ever could. "You threw me out of my own home," she said slowly, her eyes sweeping across the room. "Now I'll do the same, with more grace." The words landed like a hammer. Obina's mouth fell open, his mother's fake smile collapsed, and the rest of the family shifted nervously in their seats. No one dared to laugh now. No one dared to whisper. Kayamika turned to the doorway and gave a small nod. Within moments, 2 security guards appeared, tall and imposing, their black uniforms adding to the sudden shift in power. They had been stationed outside by the property manager earlier that morning, waiting for her instruction. Now, with just a glance from her, they stepped forward. "Please escort these people out," Kayamika said gently, almost politely, as though she were hosting a guest who had overstayed their welcome. Gasps filled the room. "What?" Obina's mother shrieked, her composure breaking at last. "You cannot do this." But the guards moved closer, standing by the table with firm expressions. Obina scrambled to his feet, reaching out desperately. "Kayamika, no. You can't mean this. Please, don't embarrass us like this. We are your family now." Her cold smile returned, sharper this time. "Family?" she asked quietly. "Family doesn't mock, humiliate, or cast out one of their own. Last night, you all made it clear I was not family to you. Today, I simply return the favor." The guards began guiding them out, one by one. Obina tried to resist, but even he knew there was no winning this battle. His mother shouted in protest, her voice echoing through the halls, but no one listened. The cousins and uncles who had laughed so freely last night now shuffled toward the door in silence, their eyes downcast, their arrogance gone. Kayamika stood where she was, her lawyer by her side, watching as the same people who had mocked her just hours before were escorted out of her home. Not once did she raise her voice. Not once did she shed a tear. By the time the doors shut behind them, the mansion was quiet again. For the first time in years, Kayamika felt the house truly belonged to her, not because her father had left it to her, but because she had claimed it with her dignity. By the next day, the story had already left the mansion and spilled into the streets of Lagos. It spread faster than wildfire, carried by neighbors, staff, and even guests who had been at the dinner. Everyone wanted to retell the shocking drama of how Kayamika, the quiet and ordinary fiance, had turned out to be the true owner of the very house Obina's family lived in. In shops, markets, and offices, people shook their heads in amazement. "Did you hear what happened at Chief Nwosu's daughter's house?" one woman asked her friend at the salon. "Obina threw her out, only to find out the house belonged to her all along." Laughter filled the room as the story was repeated again and again. Kayamika's name quickly turned into a symbol of strength. People admired how she hadn't screamed, fought, or lowered herself to their insults. Instead, she let dignity and truth speak louder than revenge. "That girl handled it like a queen," a man said at a cafe, tapping his friend's arm. "She didn't even need to raise her voice. That's real power." Women especially felt inspired by her calm composure. "She showed them that silence, when you know your worth, can be the loudest answer," another said proudly. While Kayamika's respect grew, Obina's reputation crumbled. The same man who had once boasted about his wealth and family status was now the center of ridicule. People mocked how he had humiliated the woman who not only loved him, but also owned everything he bragged about. On social media, jokes and memes about him flooded timeline. One post read, "Imagine losing the love of your life and your house in the same night." Another had his picture with the caption, "The man who threw out his landlord." Obina avoided leaving the house for days, too embarrassed to face the community. His pride, which had once been his greatest weapon, had turned into his greatest shame. Relatives who had laughed with him during the dinner now avoided him, unwilling to be associated with his downfall. Even business associates whispered behind his back, questioning his judgment and foolishness. Meanwhile, Kayamika moved through the city with grace. She didn't rush to grant interviews or flaunt her inheritance. She carried herself the same way she always had, humble, polite, yet unshakable. But now, wherever she went, people greeted her with newfound respect. Drivers tipped their hats, shopkeepers smiled warmly, and strangers whispered her name with admiration. For once, the power balance had shifted completely. Kayamika, the woman they had underestimated, now stood tall in the eyes of everyone. And Obina, the man who thought he was too good for her, was reduced to a cautionary tale, a reminder that pride and cruelty could strip a man of everything, even the love of a woman who had once been willing to give him the world. Life slowly settled after the storm, but for Kayamika, it was not about revenge or holding grudges. She knew she had been given a second chance to live fully on her own terms. Instead of wasting energy on the bitterness of what happened, she turned her pain into purpose. She began investing her wealth into charities that supported young women, girls who, like her, had been underestimated, mocked, or silenced. She wanted them to know their worth, to carry their dignity with pride, and to never let anyone make them feel small. The mansion, once filled with the arrogance and laughter of people who looked down on her, was now a place of peace. Kayamika walked its halls differently, her steps firm, her head lifted high. The echoes no longer reminded her of humiliation, but of triumph. Each room felt like it had been reclaimed, every corner a reminder that she had chosen grace over anger, strength over despair. One afternoon, sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting golden patterns across the marble floor. Kayamika paused in the middle of the hall, her hand brushing gently against the wall her father once built. She smiled softly, not with pain this time, but with gratitude. She had survived the hurt, kept her dignity, and risen stronger than before. She whispered the words that now defined her journey. Sometimes the loudest answer is silence followed by success. And with that, she continued walking, her figure calm and unshaken, a woman no longer underestimated, a woman who had finally stepped into her true beginning.